Okay, so in this video, what I want us to do is to visit back more on the idea of action, intention, and character. As we've been looking at moving a character around a space, principally in the walk cycles and so forth, one of the things that we've focused most of our attention on has been the actual mechanics of the body, the tick-tock of how the action is pieced together from the movements of the different limbs and parts. Now obviously that's all fine and it's stuff that you need to be able to master and do well. However, if that's how you always approach such things, it leaves you in a situation where you are piecing your animation together in a certain way. Specifically, what you're doing is you're taking the raw body mechanic, laying that down, and from that somehow trying to extract character movement, characterization, intention. There is, however, another way of looking at this. If we think about the car example, what are we doing with the car when it's driving round doing this sort of action scene? Well, we're concerned with how it's flowing round in space, when it's slowing down, speeding up, how it weaves and so on. What we're not caring about is the contact of the wheels. Obviously, with a vehicle, ordinarily, you'd set that up using some sort of expression or, rigging setup, whatnot, to do the wheels automatically for you. But if you compare the animation of a vehicle to the animation of a character, like our fella here, the way that we've often approached walk cycles and so forth, and the way that many people approach such motions, is analogous to taking the car, animating the wheels as the primary source of motion, and then somehow trying to get the exaggerated characterful motion on the body after the fact. Whilst it is of course important to get the basic mechanic aspects of an animation correct, if you focus too much on it, it can detract you from being able to inject character into your motions. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take another walk cycle and we're going to look at a different way of putting it together, essentially going backwards from what we've done before, to focus on the character first and then put in the necessary mechanics to support the character animation that we've done. So what you can see, of course, is I've got our lovely hulky friend here and his legs are missing. Quite simply, this is just a copy piece of geometry with the legs cut off. And although the legs controllers appear to be missing, they're not. They are actually present in the scene. They're just hidden so as they don't distract us in the meantime. This is still a complete character rig. It's just got chunks hidden away because we don't need to see them. And what we can see that we've got already is just a simple little stepped animation of our guy sort of storming forward like this and stopping and doing a little rah at the end there. So sort of trying to scare some puny human, I imagine. Obviously, we've got this pre-done here because there's nothing that particularly special to it. It's just a simple stepped cycle of him moving along there. And we can see that we've put in the basic parts of the mechanic, of course, whilst we've been doing this, such as the shift side to side on the hips there. And we can see that we've just roughly cut out a distance that he covers because, of course, when you're taking your characters forward, you want them to move a certain distance through space from point A to point B and so on. And so we're just doing that on the hips, completely ignoring what the legs might or might not need to do. Thus, the part of the action that we have focused on at this point is not the body mechanic, it's the body language. Look at him, the way he's sort of striding himself forward here, sort of angry looking, fists clenched, making what appears to be something of a strident action like this, and then doing his little at the end there. So let's get busy and see about how we will take this further forward. Since we've got this blocked out in step keys, it's pretty good as it is now. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab all of my controllers here and I'm going to change my keys over to linear. So I'll just do the old set curve there. There we go. Straight away that takes our step keys into this very simple looking animation like that. We can see certain things more easily now. He does this little anticipatory sort of, chest pump before he starts moving there. We'll work that in with some nice action soon. But in the meantime, we're just going to look at the main bits of the cycle as he's going. So depending on where we're keying, I am, of course, since I've come to linear now, going to change my graph editor default to linear. That way, just using the standard pose key tools of Lightwave itself, I don't have to worry that I'm going to get a mix-up. So just a short way here between the rise up like that, probably about 13, maybe frame 14 here. I'm just going to grab his spine controls there and just dip that down a touch, so that lets his motion begin to overlap. There we go. So we get that little bit of overlap coming in there. It's great. And then as we get to there, as he starts to shift forward, we'll sort of accelerate his torso forward first like that. So he's sort of pushing himself forward here. Okay, let's look at the hip first after that. As we move into the actual walking part of it, we'll see that that would probably be the contact point, so we'll assume that that's going to be the low there. So we'll come pretty much halfway, pop him up a little bit. Perhaps we'll just turn on our motion paths here so as we can get an idea of where he is or has been on previous frames. Again, come out to about halfway on the next, pop him up a little bit, knock all of this action in for the duration of the cycle here. So there's his bounce, bounce, up and down. Let's check him out from the front. We can see that he's still just nixing side to side there like that, which is pretty much fine really. Let's shift to the old spine here and we can do a little bit of bob and bounce on that. In this case I'm going to do it at 4 frames after the previous contact. He's sort of starting to pull his body up before the hip makes the full lift. And then here where he's just coming to rest, we'll dodge him down a little bit like that. We'll keep him down until about here-ish, so he's still sort of leant forward a bit. I'll keep him there until he has to start his rise. That rise can sort of come in a little bit sooner here. So again, we're getting a bit of an overlap there. Right, give that a little playback, see how we're looking. There we go. There we see that's giving him a bit of a clear aggression, as it were, to his walk there. So he comes, he lifts up, and of course he's going to go into the roar or what have you, into the posturing. So rather than just letting him dip straight into it, we'll give him a pull back first, really stick that chest out, then get him on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's say, to really start pushing it forward. Come to there, overshoot it a little bit, just adjust the last frame down, scotch. There we go. So looks a bit funny in the side view there, but if we look at it in perspective, that's looking a bit more decent there. So that's giving us some good rough action on the hip and the body there. Let's have a wee gander at what we're doing with these arms, because at the minute they've just got their basic pose there. So when he comes into this first step forward, we'll just start to accelerate that arm move ever so slightly. So we'll push it a little bit further back there, and we'll get the forearm and bring it in a bit tighter like this. So this gives us a little double overlap there. Again, we'll come here, hold it out just a little bit straighter on the first part of the swing forward. So it comes up there just as it begins to swing back. We'll again bring the forearm up a little to overlap it. Just repeat this in through the range of his cycle here. And then when he comes to the stop, which is there at the end of his stomping, and we'll roll it just a bit in, and we'll bring the entirety of this arm clenched up, or inflection as we should say. Put a little extra bit of roll onto it there. We can then possibly grab all of those arm controllers and we'll just actually shove them a couple of frames off like that before coming back somewhere here to the intermediate period and just tightening that elbow a little bit to help there with the overlap. There we're seeing that during the main chunk of the walk it's got that little snap on it. That's nice. So what we can do is then of course come round to the other side and we'll just start working in detail for the other arm here. What we'll do is we'll grab all of the arm controllers at this point just before he's about to make that initial lurch forward to begin his walk, and we'll push them, let's say, 2 frames back there. And what this will let us do, let's come out, say, 4 frames here, and we'll just take the elbow and the shoulder and push his arm just a little bit backwards like that, so it's got a slight trail as his body lurches, but then we'll bring it ever so slightly ahead of time, so just a little bit of asynchronicity here, let's say just by 1 frame into its forward position. And again, we'll grab the elbow somewhere there and leave it trailing just a small amount, and then we'll get back into pretty much what we were doing on the other side. So tighten the elbow at the forward part of the backswing there. We drag it out just a little bit during the forward swing. This gives him that little snap, snap, snap where he's sort of really pumping the muscles in his arm, gives it that sense of additional strength and intent, really, almost as if he's, of course, expressing some kind of frustration or anger by having to actuate his limbs. So let's have a look at how all of that looks in motion. There we go, starting to look quite nice there. Right, so I'll give this a little appraisal of what we've got so far, and you know, good chunks of it look pretty good, but there's certain things that I don't really think are exemplifying the mood of this guy at the minute, and specifically it's his takeoff here is one of the things that stands out to me. So this point at which he first lurches forward and then starts moving, you know, he's got this sort of really push action that we're putting on his chest there to say, "Go, I'm going forward," but then his hip is actually moving quite slowly. It turns it into a little bit of a wimpy action. So what I'm going to do is my hip there, I'm going to get the old graph editor here. I'm going to grab the Z position here. Let's see where that frame is. It's going to be here basically, isn't it? So yeah, it's from this guy onwards. So I'm going to grab basically all of these Z keys here, and I'm going to pull him down a bit, really sort of rally him into that move a bit more. Not quite to, I don't want it to be straight because I don't want him to reach full acceleration. I do still, you know, need a slight moment to begin his speed up. A little touch there. So of course he starts accelerating, as we can see there. Now let's just give that a little peek, see how it looks in comparison. Yeah, that's stronger. He's now got a stronger punch into his initial walk. So we like that. That's looking a bit better than it did. So there we go, nice little adjustment there that helps to maintain the sort of character that we're looking for here. What else might we do? Well, you know, I might actually say that as he starts moving, then I'm going to speed him up even more. We can sort of accelerate more greatly as he's moving along here. First of all, because I was auto keying on all channels, we see that of course these midpoint lift ups here have also left us with Z keys in place, which we truly do not need. So I could just go and delete these one by one, but actually something that will do this nicely for me is to use the key reduction. Of course we were on linear keys when we did that, so these mid keys are going to be on a perfect straight line between the previous 2 keys that we had in place. So I'm going to go and just use a smart reduction filter here with a very low value, and that just kills off those keys there. So we have him take his first jump forward there, he comes down to here, and then I'm going to grab all of these Z keys and drag them down just a little, of course then grabbing the next chunk here, pulling them into line, and that just accelerates him that little bit further forward. And I'm going to bring these just a little bit more. Obviously he's coming toward a stop, so he's going to begin decelerating there. I'm going to grab this last lot and just pull them off like that to just tweak out the curve as we see it going on there. Let's take a look at what that's given us. Right, he's really storming forward now, look at that. There we go. Yep, off he goes. Definitely having a good storm forward towards whoever it is he's trying to have a bit of a growl at. Now just imagine if we'd started keying this up in our initial stepped pass with getting the feet going and everything. We'd have to be pulling all of those, getting those right as well, doing these kind of simple timing and spacing adjustments would be a lot more difficult for us. The legs on this guy really are just like his wheels. They're just a carrier, a vehicle, something that he's using to make the move forward. But the intent, the body language, that's all in the upper body. That's in how he is choosing to move his body through the space. So let's look at amplifying that sense of purpose a little bit more, shall we? And we'll go on to looking at the head and neck here. So what I'm going to do is come over to his neck controller there, and let's have a look at where we want to start doing things. Okay, so it starts to rise up there, and I'll just bring the actual neck and the head keyframes here, just move them a couple out like that, so they've got that slight overlap to them. Then as his body starts to lurch forward just for a couple of frames there, then what I'll do is that hold before he starts to move forward, I'm going to move that back just by just a single frame here, and then 1, 2, 3 frames, let's say. I'm really going to pitch that head and neck forward. In fact, I'm going to overextend the pitching of the neck forward just a bit like that. Also come back into this bit where he does his rise like that. I'm going to let the neck down a little bit to overlap, but then a couple of frames later, or a frame later, I'm going to pitch the head down some like that. I'll put a little linear jump on it as well, and we'll do that on the neck, so the whole thing will overshoot just a little bit like this. Let's see how that begins to look. Maybe a little too bobby, the head there, sort of flopping around. Yeah, he's not a floppy guy. So let's actually take this key here that I've got at 22 for the neck here, move it down a couple more, and there we go. That's a bit stronger. Again, maybe the head bobs a little too much, so what we'll actually do to counter that is, as the neck is coming down, keep the head pitched up, and we won't pitch it down quite as fast as we were doing there. Now that gives him a stronger sense of purpose, looking where he's going, keeping his eye on his target like that. So we see that it starts there, and that's of course where his body's pitched forward. So we'll drop a hold key in there for the head and neck, just key them in their existing position. And we get to this point, we'll have him pull his head up a little. So this is sort of the contact point, remember, where he's down. This is the up. As he comes up, we'll counter the head and neck ever so slightly, pushing them that way. And back to the next down, slightly up again, back to the mid, slightly down, and we'll just continue to roll the head in this way throughout the cycle. Let's have a look at how it looks so far. Before, of course, we go keying the whole thing, only to discover that it's wrong. Yeah, that's looking good. Blink and you'll miss it. If we look at it nice slow there, see, that's keeping his head on a swivel, keeping his eyes on where he's going. So we'll maintain that. We get to the high point, pitch head and neck down, get to the low point, pitch them up, midpoint, pitch them down, low point, bring them up. And there we are, coming to rest. We'll let the, we're really pitching the neck forward. I'm going to come back to the head and straighten it back out. So that's really the weight of his head and neck there, shifting forward as his momentum starts to come down and he decelerates. There, look at that little overshoot of the head there, which he sort of maintains into this point here. Rattle over so we can see it a bit more clearly. And come here, we'll keep that just pitched down there. A little bit of overlap as his body's drawing up there. Then just as he comes to the full up, let his neck come right up, down a little there. Grr. Okay, and I sort of like that. I don't like the way that it's whatever I had keyed before there, so I'm just going to grab his head and neck controllers there, just copy the pose that we've got here, jump out to the next keyframe there and paste it in. So there we go. Somewhere in the mid here, I'll again give him a little overshoot on the neck, counter the head like that. Maybe that's just a little too much overshoot, too strong. Again, risks making his head look floppy. Bouncing it back so quickly again doesn't look right, so I'll just copy that and paste it back here. And what I'm going to do is actually, because then of course he starts to rear up before he comes down to be like, so I'm going to just bring that down 2 frames, maybe take that first one there before it, and roll that back 1 frame just to give a little more spacing in here. Then, as he's coming to the rear up, so he's leading with the head ever so slightly, so we pitch the neck backwards, but I'm going to pitch the head downwards like this, so he's sort of letting that force of pulling himself up roll up the length of his spine like that. There we go, and we'll need to put some little holds in there, so we'll look at that afterwards. But let's go back now and check out our whole motion thus far and see how he's generally looking. There we go, look at that purposeful bounce on the head, and because we're sort of countering the swing of the body there, you see that he's keeping his head on the swivel. That's giving him that sense of being focused on where he's going. Let's have a look at it from the front there. Okay, we can probably work on the side-to-side twisting that we've got going on here. So we'll take a peek at that. Let's have a look at it in perspective. Yeah, look at that guy. He's looking a bit meaner now. The way that he's charging forward, very much leading with his head. Knows where he's going, knows what he's doing. We're starting to get a much clearer impression of his intent and his mood and his emotion. So let's continue by having a look at the roll on that head, because we don't really want it swinging side to side quite as much. We obviously need it to counter the roll of the body, but we don't want him to be looking left, right, left, right. We want his head to more or less stay steady, as it were. So first of all, let's just bring up our graph here for the heading channel. We can see, of course, where we've got frames there that have been created at intermediary points like this. Pretty easy to pick out in this graph here, so we can just find those guys and get rid of them like that. So that'll make it a little easier to fix these rolls. And what we can see, of course, is that these are just set straight with one another. So much like we did with the hip, we can just grab these and start making our adjustments here in the graph editor directly. So there we are, that's got him looking forward when he's at that key point in his work, or his walk, sorry, I should say. Let's just jump back to the other side of it there, grab those, and again just tweak him back to be looking straight ahead like this. There we go. Let's check these outside bits that we've got there, so as we can see exactly what we're looking at there. I'm just going to come to the end here. Yeah, okay, that's pretty much forward looking. This bit at the end here will say that we want to keep him forward looking as well. Yeah, need to give him a bit of a tweak back in the opposite direction like that. Go back and look at the opening here. Of course, he takes himself off a little bit on the side there. That's fine, we don't mind the side look. So he's sort of rolling into his walk there. So that all looks pretty good. Let's look at him from the front, because obviously the head is also tipping. We can see, of course, that he starts out when he's just sort of standing there in this relaxed pose with a slight tip. We often, of course, keep our heads tipped. You know, it's very rare that we've got our heads constantly square and straight. We often sort of have them relaxed, something like this. So there we go. We can see that whilst he's walking, we do have a bit of a tip side to side, but it doesn't look unnatural. And since it counters against the body, it appears to be pretty good. Let's have a look as he comes into his stop. Okay, so we again see that's something on the heading here. And take out that intermediate unnecessary key and perhaps just, or perhaps not. It doesn't look too bad as it is. But then seeing that last roll in from the front, I am tempted to put a bit of tip like this on it, as again, it's sort of offsetting his pose counter to his body in that fashion. So just work a bit more, bring up the bank channel here. Again, we can see we've got some unnecessary keys. Really can nod all of those out. And if we push these pose positions around, there we go, you can get something like that going on. And again, we'll just adjust the end here. Ah yes, there, something like that, looks pretty good. So let's just roll this all back then from the front here, so as we can see pretty much how that looks. Yeah, head action's looking pretty decent. So let's look at our perspective view. Yeah, we've got a good appearance of purpose going on there. What we will do, of course, is as he comes down into that forward push at the end, is we'll bring his head up. So we'll take that forcefulness that he's pushing himself forward here like this, and up until about here, then we'll of course grab the head and neck and we'll pitch them up like this, so that movement really rolls through his body. And we'll put a bit more tweening work on it. We see here we've got this sort of little pinch in the head and neck there, so I'm just going to grab that frame. It's a bit quick, so I'm going to extend it by 2 frames, how long he takes to go into that. And I'm also going to create a hold for it in the same position, so we'll just, with those still selected, copy the pose of those controls there. Let's paste them in just here. We can possibly bring this key just a bit forward there, and probably speed this one up a little bit as well, so as his roll comes up more briskly. See how that starts to look. Ah, that's more like it. Let's wait till we get there again. And oh yeah, see, that's got a nice bit of punch and character to it. So let's have a look and see how we are starting to look overall here. I think we're starting to come out quite nicely there. We're definitely getting more of a sense of what this guy's about, what he's, thinking, what he's meaning and intending to do here. He's got, quite a bit of his action intention playing through his body language and his motions quite clearly. We're starting to really see that round out now that we're getting a lot of these in-betweens in. So let's look at some more bits, and again it's mostly going to be towards the end here, because the major part of that sort of storming forward cycle there is starting to look pretty good, I think. I'm quite happy with the takeoff as well, where he sort of puffs himself out before charging forwards there. So we're going to come up to this end section, which at the moment I think is probably the weakest part, where he goes into a sort of puny human growl, what have you. So let's have a look at that, because quite frankly I'm finding that a little weak. Temporarily then I'm going to just offset my timeline into his hold here, just so I don't have to keep playing back the whole thing. So there we go, just 115 through 145 there. Let's take a good look at, yeah, see, that's very soft, kind of weak, not much happening with it. So what shall I do first of all? Well, I think I'm going to speed it up a little bit. At least speed up the motion that's occurring here. We can see, of course, that he does have a tip in his hip is pushing forward there, not just his spine. So let's grab the hip and the spine controllers there. The rise up is good. And what I think we want to do is for the spine is to create a small hold. So again, I'm just going to copy those keys there. Come out, let's just say 2. I'm going to paste them. I'll look back at my hip. Of course, the key point at which he reaches this lurch forward is there. So at that point, I'm going to grab all of these pertinent controllers, hip, spine, arms, the lot, grab all of those there and bring them 2 frames further forward like this. Now, of course, I've got tweens in there. You can see, of course, I've now got this 1 point or 1 frame tween there, so that's obviously wrecked that motion just a little bit. So I'm going to take the body lift up and the hold for it, bring those back 1. Of course, this other tween part of the spine, and now just going to bring 1 forward there like that. So let's see how that whole thing is looking. That's quicker, breaking into it quicker, and there's a bit of an overlap on the head. Now that's given it a slightly different character because the head is so much more delayed from the body there. What might be an idea at this point, since we've got him coming down pretty quick like this, let's take the actual final down point of the spine and let's push it 1 later. So there we see that's offsetting the spine dip from the hip there. It's lurching forward faster, it's leading with the chest, but then it's arriving a moment later. And what I'll do over these next 4 frames here is I'll pitch it up just a little like that, and of course continue that pitch up there on the very final frame. So that should work into the timing of the head a bit as well. There we see that. At the minute it looks a little stiff, and the stiffness here, it's partly the speed, how quickly he's dodging down into this move here. We could perhaps take this tween, just jump it across one, and we do that because the amount of movement between this point and this point, the amount he has come forward by, is greater than between here and here. So that makes him not quite so snappy, still a little bit snappy, but not massively so. Now these last two frames then, he's not coming up quite as far. So what we can perhaps do is make a copy of the pose here, hold it for 2, paste it back in, and then we'll take this rise up, move it forward 2, and we'll just bring up the graphs here, grab the pitch for all 3 of those spine controls there, grab those endpoints of the up, lift there, and consequently we can tweak how much bounce there is in this, and we can possibly also nudge it in time. There, that's more like it. Now we see that the head, whereas previously it was arriving later than the spine was, it's now arriving ever so slightly before. So it's as if he's moving his head and growling, and there's a little follow through on the body, which for what he's doing here is probably a more natural state of affairs for him to be behaving in. So let's take a look at that head and neck motion again. And what we can do from this point is, just as his body is coming all the way up, because we still want him looking forward, we can let his head and neck just have pitched down ever so slightly, so we're more or less maintaining his eye line here. Let's have a look at that. And what we are seeing is that because of the crossover points in time there, it creates that sort of bob, that little nick down on the chin. You can see, of course, when we're in full playback, it's a little bit unnatural. We could perhaps space this out, make it take slightly longer, but what I'm actually going to do is bring it forwards there by a small amount, which times it in more closely with the action happening in the spine, and that previous key there I'm going to bring back one space. There we go, that's softer, the overlap between the head and the body. This still looks a little weak, and this is down to the arms again. Interestingly here, you can make the same comparison as to what we were talking about with the legs. The arms at this point are they're just sort of hanging on there. They're part of the mechanic in a way, but they've also got part of the intention and the body language in them. If we hid the arms, got rid of those, then we'd see this language coming through the chest and the body saying one thing, but of course as we see our arms as they are attached, it starts to look a little weak, so we need to put more strength and hoof into those as well. So to put more action into these arms, we really want to bring them up so that he can throw them back as he's, pushing his chest out, really showing off, posturing with his body. So of course we want them to come up and be more close in, and then going back as he throws his body forwards. So let's take a look at the timings for this. We'll want to bring the arms, start them moving just a moment before the spine starts to lift up, and that is there. We can see that's the lift up point for that, and we've got arm keyframes here. So let's grab his arm controllers here for all of the elbow, shoulder, wrist, and let's dodge them back. I'm going to say 3 frames. Okay, what we'll then do is we'll go, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and what I'm going to do here, start bringing his arms in, something like this. There we are, he's sort of clutching into his chest somewhat with that arm, and we'll be doing the same more or less with this arm here. Slightly twinning, but we'll keep him a bit asymmetrical like that, so it's a bit more natural. There we go. Let's watch what's actually happening on the shoulder controls. You can see that we've got animation there, so again we'll just bring these back into line with the arms, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on those, I think. We'll bring his shoulder up a little. We'll bring it in just a scotch, and the same over this side. This way we have the shoulders reach their extension slightly before the arms do. Now, this will be our extreme up point for the arms, and we really, as he's throwing himself, we want to have pretty much the whole thing happening at once. So let's just take these. We will offset them one frame from the motion of the chest. So I'm actually going to grab that and pull it out to that point there. But we want his arms to come up a little quicker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this pose, which is almost at his full grip there. Obviously no keyframe for it, but I'm going to copy the position that his arms are in there. Come back 2 frames earlier and paste it. So that lets his arms start to come up, and we see they sort of slow in. So we've got a nice slow in movement there. We'll create another little in between. So 1, 2, 3, after the start of the movement, we're just going to bring the forearms ever so slightly ahead of what the upper arm has moved to, and we're also just going to roll the upper arm inwards ever so slightly ahead of itself like this. And that creates a nice little overlapping action, as we can see there. It's starting to look pretty sweet. Okay, how's this looking then if we play it back? Oh yeah, look at that. Now there's some proper punch on our guy. Grr, don't mess with me. So let's make sure that those shoulders all work into it. So of course we've got the point where they arrive, and we'll tie those straight into the arms. So we're going to copy their pose that is here, come out to that point, paste it right there, so as they're timing twins absolutely with the arms as they release, but we'll push them back just a little faster. So this key here we'll bring forward like that, and there we go. Right, let's create some offshoot on these arms. Not much. We don't want them flopping around like a cartoon character, because that would belie the muscle that he's got. You know, he's got a stiff crunch when he pushes himself like this. He's not just got these, you know, weak flappy arms. There's strength in them. There's tension on these muscles, so they can't just overshoot like some cartoon thing. So we'll come about 4 frames after here, bring it backwards just a scotch, let it out just a scotch, and roll it out just a scotch, and of course do the exact same thing over on this side. Just little small movements. We'll come 1 frame later, at which point we'll get the elbows and we'll extend those out more. Again, we don't want to extend the arms completely straight because he's got big tight biceps, and of course that is going to resist any extension of the forearm like that. See how that looks? Yeah, that little overlap. Look, you can really feel the tension of the muscles in those arms pulling against their own weight and their own momentum as they're swung backwards like that. So what we'll do is, again, we'll take these elbows here and we'll take their last keyframes and we'll just offset them by 1 single frame, so as their final arrival forward is ever so slightly behind that of the upper arm. Again, not much, because we're keeping the tension in those arm muscles. There we go. That's looking pretty sweet now. So wind back to frame 1 and we can give the entire animation thus far a bit of an appraisal. I'm just going to select something else so I don't have to be looking at this motion path the whole time. And let's see how he looks. Stomp, 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 stomp. What are you looking at? Grr. Oh yeah, okay, there we go. That's looking an awful lot better now. So what we're seeing, of course, is we've really started to inject the mood and the intentions of this character through his body language without worrying too much about the body mechanic that is required to move him through space. Obviously, we've paid attention to the certain details, like the fact that he is walking, so you have got this tick-tock swing of the arms going on. But aside from that, we've really tried to focus on the little intricacies of his motion that let us see what he's thinking, feeling, and what he's meaning to do. Just watch it back a good few times here to make sure that, you know, we really are happy with the motion that we're seeing. His takeoff, is okay. He's coming to rest. Seems to me to be pretty fine. I'm going to put, I think I see an opportunity for a little bit of, more interesting stuff here, which is where he begins like this. As he starts to lift up, I'm going to tighten this elbow, I think. Yes, of course, because his elbow swings out there and then it tightens up as he comes into the step. So at this early point, what I'm going to do is as he comes up there, I'm going to place a hold somewhere around here. And at this point, I'm going to bring his elbow up like this. And also, I think his wrist, sort of tighten that off a bit. Of course, that elbow pose needs to be recopied across. So copy it and just paste it on that next frame. And of course, what we see is this here happens a little too swiftly, so we can push that forward a frame, and I think it needs some slight interaction from the upper arm here. So what I'm going to do is drag that upper arm frame we have here, forward one, whereupon the arm will be thrown ever so slightly backward, and as he comes up here, I'm going to rotate this arm in and also bring it forward slightly at the shoulder like this, copying that pose and pasting it out to here. Let me just roll all of that in, see how it looks. I'm just going to go 1 through 40 here. Watch that back. Throwback that he does of the arm is perhaps now a little fast, so I'm going to find those keys there, bring that back one just to give it a little more time to move. Bring this one forward one. See how that looks. There, that's a bit better. Let's again look at our whole thing. How does it really play out into his overall action? Yeah, that gives him just a little bit of extra life there in that arm. He's got something else going on. He's sort of got that little arm just sort of tensing and getting ready to go. You can sort of get that sense of tension that's building in him just a moment before he starts his walk there. It might snap forward a little fast, I think, when he then takes the first step, when he comes snap up to here. So what I'm going to do is find the keys that exist there for the shoulder, elbow and wrist. So there's the back. So I'm going to, let's just look at that again. That's 44, that's that point after the swing. So I'm going to take that whole bunch, just shift those by one there. Gives it a bit more space, but it still keeps a bit of a snap, as you see there. As he takes that first step, he sort of rolls that arm and then pulls it back into the snap forward, which gives it sort of a sense of purposefulness. So he's really setting off there. Potentially, let's just have a look at what it looks like if we move those two frames there over by one. Ah, yes, okay, that's possibly more like it. Let's see, it's smoother. Yeah, that's probably good. So we like what we're seeing there then. So then, for the most part at this stage, I'd say that my mainline keying is really done. I've got my key poses, my in-betweens, overlap and timing, that's all pretty much worked out. Where we go from here, of course, is to, follow through into finalising our whole animation, smoothing it, curving it and whatnot. And really, considering the way that we've approached this, where we've tried to get the character and ignore the mechanics of the legs, there are two ways that we can go with this. We can either start working on, the curves and smoothing out this whole upper body now, get that completed, and then go to work on the legs, or we can just start putting in the legs now and then polish the thing as a whole. Personally, I prefer this latter method. Thinking about it, I can't see any great reason why one approach from this stage onward would be any better or worse than the other. But what you might find is that if you work all of this up nice and smooth with curved keys, that when you then come to start putting on the legs, and you maybe do those as stepped or linear to start with to make sure you've got those right, it'll be hard to get a visual sense as you'll have this sort of disjointed look to the animation. So what I'm going to do at this stage then is to first of all work on putting the legs in, because we've got the movement, how he moves through space, that's all locked down. I consider it's time to bring the legs into the picture. Before we do any of that though, this seems like a nice and opportune moment to take a little break, since we've done a fair bit of stuff here, and of course we've still got a fair bit to go through yet. So we'll wrap up this video at this point and we'll proceed with all of these extra bits in the next video.